What's that? Need to do a sound check? Okay. How's this looking? So, hear me okay? Check, check, check. All right. Father of the Bride?
Yeah, Father of the Bride.
Pretty good show.
What's the other one? Cheaper by the Dozen.
Yeah, the old one or the new one? They're talking about the new one, I guess. Cheaper by the dozen.
With Steve Martin.
No, there was one older than that had. And welcome to 2026. And we're going to start with our next lesson, which is lesson 11 in church history. And we're going to talk about the church in the East. And we're going to go away from the West. And so we'll see how this goes, because as I was doing this is this whole new deal to me. All right. And something that I've never been acquainted with whatsoever at all, except for one thing. And we'll kind of get to that, and I'll talk about that when we get there. So first of all, our declaration today it's from the Latin root declarito. Is that right? And it means to make clear. So I want to make clear a few things. You can get a hold of live stream while you were live. Call or send to Jesse. That's his number there. If it's recorded, I do like emails and comments and put it on the Church Center app. And here's my information over here. And on the Church Center app, we have some resources, hopefully, that are in there and that you can kind of look at. But I do need your help. All right. So everybody, I need your help. Uh-oh, where did it go? Oh, I went backwards. Or not. Got to hit the right button. Send in your request for topics. And the reason I'm going to say that is because we are going to, as we move into the spring, I want to end this series about in May. And there's going to be lots of things going on during the springtime that we won't meet every week. And so there's only about 1,500 years to cover during this period of time, and which will be difficult. Now, some of it will go a little bit faster, but let me kind of show you the schedule that I put together, and this was kind of what we're looking at. So tonight, we're going to kind of look at various times on that, and we're going to look at the Eastern Church, Eastern Christians. We're going to talk about Islam next week, and Islam and Christianity and how kind of they have interplayed through the centuries, and that would be the way to do it. And then I'm going to come back to, I'm going to have knee surgery or hip surgery. And so Jesse's going to take over on January 18th, and he's going to do a class on the last Roman. And he's going to be talking about that. So I look forward to that. I know he'll do an excellent job. I will focus a lot on the constellation of philosophy. And so Nate, you'll have to tune in from Okinawa because you said that you needed some help with that one. So we'll look at that. Fantastic book. Anyway, we'll talk about that. January 25th, no class. We're going to try to take the last Sunday off, kind of get back to our normal group schedule. And so I'm just going to take that off, take a little bit of a break. I'll still be recovering probably. And then February we'll start back, and we're going to start in the Middle Ages, and we're going to talk about the Holy Roman Empire and the Great Schism. Those happen in that early part of the Middle Ages, which is going to be, let's say, about 500 to 1,000 when the Great Schism happens. And then we have a religious event on the 8th, and hopefully there will be a team wearing orange and blue there. And so that's the Super Bowl. And I thought, at first I had a class scheduled, and I thought, why fight it? It doesn't matter who's playing. People want to sit back and watch it. It's a national holiday for all intents and purposes and everything else. So we'll just give in. Don't fight that. So we'll just do that. So we'll take a week off. And then we're going to come back to the Middle Ages, talk about the Crusades, Inquisitions. I'll probably talk about Not So Innocent III, the Roman Catholic Church, and some others like that. And we'll do that. And then we're going to stay in the Middle Ages, and we're going to really focus on a lot of the corruption that happened in the Catholic Church. And there's the only thing it resembled church was it had church in the name. All right, and that was kind of it. And they had the infrastructure and things like that, but it really went bad during that time. And so we'll talk about that. There was a book actually called The Bad Popes, believe it or not, that had like 13 bad popes. And I read that book, and they were some bad characters, I'm telling you that. Then we'll move into, later in March, we're going to start back the pre-Reformation, John Hus, Wycliffe, I think it's John Wycliffe, and a couple of other guys there that you'll see. And then we're going to start to hit the Reformation. We'll spend some time on Martin Luther and Zwingli. And then we'll talk about, moving from that, we'll talk about John Calvin and some of the things that happened out that, and Reformed theology. There'll be spring break in there, so we'll skip another class. And then we're going to talk about the Christian arts. And I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm going to lean on my wife a lot to help me with this. But we've been listening to some stuff about Christian art, and it is just fascinating. It's going to cover lots of period of time, and you'll see the development of that, and we'll probably run up well past our time period in terms of a narrative. And by the way, that means Christian arts, you're talking about not just the paintings, but architecture, music, and I'm missing some sculpture work. And we'll just talk about how that has been a part of Christianity nearly from its beginning. Kind of interesting topic to get to, and that's a lot to cover in that period of time. Easter Sunday, so we'll skip that class, another holiday there, but I'm going to switch out, no, that's right, Easter Sunday, And that was the 29th. We're going to go ahead and meet. Since Easter Sunday, I just swapped those dates. Originally, I had it the other way around, but I just swapped those dates. And then we'll get into the Reformation, a little bit more about that, and talk about Separatist, Anabaptist, some of the others that they get in there. The Catholic Reformation, kind of their answer to Protestantism. And then we'll do the Church of England, and a lot of people get more familiar with this and what happened with the Church of England and Henry VIII and some of the other things that go on with that. Skip a class April, and then let's come to here. We'll talk about the Great Awakening, and then we're going to talk about some new factions such as Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, Christian Scientists, some of the ones that a lot of people call more cultic because they're not mainstream Christianity. And then I'm going to hit some American denominations, all right? And then the last one is kind of a potpourri where we'll talk about what may be going on with the church in the future. And it's some kind of interesting things. I pick up bits and pieces, and I don't know that that's exactly what we're going to do. That could change. That's why it says tentative. So what my input to you is, if there's something of interest that you say, I want to make sure we cover that, then let's cover that. I mean, I didn't put anything about the Restoration movement, and some people will say, well, let's talk about that, and I could definitely put that in there, and there's some real interesting things that happened along that. And so that's been an effort, and it's not just like Church of Christ is a restoration church, all right? But they're not the only ones that ever tried to do that. There's plenty of groups that have said, we want to restore first century Christianity, and that doesn't happen, but it gets to be a very interesting topic whenever you delve in that and get into some of that. And we'll do some comparative theologies and kind of what separates and what makes churches different when you go from one place to the other. So again, I really want your input to give me direction, because if not, and you say, well, I really wish to do this, then I won't make fun of you. I'll just say, if you say, well, I want to talk about, I don't know, First Church of the Mattress or something like that, it's like, no. we used to have some of those that we in college would say First Methodist and Bedside Church, and anyway, bad jokes. All right, heard on the street, a Pennsylvania listener who happens to be a Catholic, when I made a comment, I said, that's what Catholics like to think. He said, that's not what Catholics like to think. That is what they think. And I think he's right about that. And what I was talking about, it was the Pope at the time, and I made a comment, that's what Catholics would like to think, that this happened. And he goes, no, that is what Catholics think. So if he's listening again, you made the class time. James Black asked, how does one get the Great after their name? Very interesting question, and there's lots of them that are there. If you go up to look at who all has been called the Great, you're going to get a list of hundreds, I would imagine, but some of them. Like you can talk about, if I said, who is the Great? And you could say, well, Alexander the Great. Who else? Oh, yeah, that's probably one of the first ones that comes to mind. And you can go on and on with some of the greats. And there's, when we went to Istanbul and I were getting our tour guide, he started talking about Suleiman the Magnificent. So he was beyond great, and so it's like, well, that's even beyond that. So we'll talk about Suleiman the Magnificent maybe next week. All right. I don't know the answer to that, but I think you got to be pretty good at what you do and make an impact on the world, not just your day and time, but you got to have lasting impact about what goes on. And then Mark Henderson over here, I asked him last Tuesday, was Jesus Christ God or man? And he answered yes. Very profound, Mark. And we're going to talk a little bit about it because that's what leads into this. Now, so what's on the docket for tonight? So we're going to talk about Christology, and that's exactly that, is Christ, the nature of Christ, the nature and person of Christ. And then we're going to talk about Oriental Orthodoxy. We'll talk about some things that happen in Africa, Caucasus. If you're Caucasian, this is where you get the name from. And then we're going to move back into Asian. Probably going to duplicate that a little bit. So that's kind of what's on the docket for tonight. So let's talk about Christology. Back up just a little bit. I read this and actually bought the book that this was written in because I think this was just amazing. And this is a quote, and it's Philip Jenkins. It's called The Jesus Wars, and then the subtitle is How 4 Patriarchs, 3 Queens, and 2 Emperors Decided What Christians Would Believe for the next 1,500 years. And he's right about this, all right? And I won't get into that. We've already covered a lot of this. But he says, pivotal to the ancient Jesus Wars were 4 great questions that to different degrees have shaped all of subsequent debates within Christianity. Foremost is the deceptively simple question posed by Jesus himself, who do you say that I am? And building on that are 3 follow-ups. What is the church? By what authority do you do this? And what must I do to be saved? Nearly every religious argument are some variation of those 4 questions. And I could quiz you and say, pick one, and you would say, yep, that fits in there. And I've seen parts of it like instrumental music. Well, that is, what is the church? And who gets to decide things? Well, by what authority do you do this? And you can go on and on with this. The most important question, though, in my opinion, is, who do you say that Jesus is? And there is a correct answer to that, and it has nothing to do with his nature or his personhood. He is Lord. And you answer that question correctly, I think the rest of the stuff doesn't matter as much. But that's not what makes history. What makes history is to talk about these, about what people would say about that. And when we move out of the 4th century and kind of into the 5th century, that is the question that is the debate. And we're going to hit some terms that we're going to hit in a minute when we do our words of the week, basically. And you're going to hear that. And they're terms that don't come natural to me, probably don't come natural to you, and you'll have to sit there and think about it, but we'll try to do a little help as we go through that. So up to this point in time in our narrative, we've had these councils. We had the Council of Nicaea. That was the first Council of Nicaea, and that dealt with Arianism. And if you recall what Arianism, it was basically about God. All right. They also set the date of Easter coming up this next year, and it's kind of a convoluted formula. And then they did some things on church polity. In other words, how did the churches are organized? And that's what there was. The first Council of Constantinople, they addressed Arianism again because they didn't feel like they had solved that. And then they revised the Nicene Creed to come up with a little different wording on there. And then about another 50 years later, the First Council of Ephesus, there they dealt with Nestorianism, and we're going to key off of that, Pelagianism, and Mary was proclaimed Theotokos, and that's a Greek word that means mother of God, okay? And the reason Nestorius brought into the question, how can you call Mary the mother of God since God is uncreated? And so they get into these kind of debates, and it gets a little crazy sometimes when you start thinking about it. Something that we don't pay a lot of attention to, but that's one of the things that they will do here. They elevated bishops of Constantinople and Jerusalem to patriarchs, and so that made 5 patriarchs. You had Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, and then Jerusalem. And so those are the ones that are there. 4 of those will try to trace their lineage authority back to the apostles. The one that's the outlier on that is Constantinople. But since that's where the emperor was, then it was pretty important to have a patriarch there to kind of ride herd on things. And then the Second Council of Ephesus, which they call the Robber Council, that's the one that says, basically they refuted Miaphysitism. All right, we're going to get into these words, and that's basically what they did, which was different than what they did at the First Council. So that's later on the Catholic Church will call that the Robber Council, and that's basically what it means. And then we had the Chalcedon, which repudiated monophysitism, and they came up with the Chalcedonian Creed, which affirms 2 natures of Christ. All right, got all that? So, yeah, and I already see people's eyes closing, so it's like, okay, we've waded off into it. So, the Council of Chalcedon, all right, down here. This was how they ended this thing. At the end of it, they expected everybody to sign off on this. And basically, this is what they said. This was 451. We teach harmoniously that he is the same perfect in Godhead, the same perfect in manhood, truly God, truly man, the same of a reasonable soul and body, the same essence being with the Father in the Godhead, and the same essence being with us in manhood, acknowledged in two natures, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation. You guys all ready to sign off on that? Okay, I've got no volunteers. How many would agree with that statement? I don't agree with it because, first of all, it was not harmonious. And the second thing is that last yellow clause there was a lot. I think there's still confusion about it, if you will. And so let's talk about a little bit of that confusion. Now, all right, let's get into the words of the day. Now, my warning, and I probably should have put a warning here. One is how you think about that, in my opinion, is not a salvation issue. It's not a fellowship issue. There are other people that believe it is a fellowship issue. And if you don't believe the way they believe, then you are wrong. And Kathy and I actually attended a church that we could not have communion because we didn't adhere to their Christology. Now, they didn't ask us which Christology to believe, because if we would have said something, we would have said, well, what do you have? And they would have said something, we said, oh, it sounds about right, and we'd have mind moved on. All right, so that's kind of interesting when you get into that. Most churches will allow that, but some of the ones that we'll talk about today do not allow that. So Gus is going to give us some words of wisdom, and they're all Greek, Logan. Monophysitism. That comes from the Greek word mono. Everybody knows a monorail. It means one rail, right? It means single, solitary, or alone, all by itself, mono. And physis, which means nature, and that's going to continue through all the rest of these. So in theology, it means a single divine nature that overshadows Christ's humanity. So what this is saying is, we believe, if you hold to this, then you believe that there is a single divine nature of Christ, and his humanity had nothing to do with anything. All right? Everybody okay with that? Okay, I see a couple of heads are going no, and the thing is they will say, and one of them even said, it's like an ocean. His divinity is like an ocean, and his humanity is like a drop in that ocean. I think they said a drop of honey or something like that. Now, the problem is you cannot use an analogy for us to make us understand that. All right? But that's what a monophysicist would believe. And I'll stumble on these words several times during tonight. All right? So be patient with me. The next one is Miaphysitism, and it's the Eastern Oriental Church believes this, all right? And it's from the Greek name Mia, meaning one, and physis, meaning, and physis, which is the same as that of their nature, and it means one united nature, both fully divine and fully human. All right? Okay? One united nature, and it gets into the semantics of what do you mean by nature, all right? Both fully divine and fully human. So the idea is one. Now these guys get influenced by and influence Islam. Because if you know what Islam says, there is one God. This, whenever you get to the others about Christ being God, Islam goes, well, wait a second, Allah is God. You know, we would say God the Father, Jesus the Son, which one's God? And the Holy Spirit, what should we say? And so that's where they kind of get sideways with this stuff. Miaphysitism, the Oriental group, Eastern Oriental, believes it's just one. You see that little bit of that Islam kind of coming through there? So that's the way they would believe that. And then the last one is Diophysitism, Greek duo, meaning two, and it means two distinct, inseparable natures in one person. All right, everybody clear on all that? Because if you're not, join me. Because I have read this and read this and read this, and I can see something pop up on the pages, and I go, what's the point? and I really look at it and I think it was a lot of hair splitting over some terminology, if you will, and wordsmithing, but yet this caused wars, persecution, and who knows what else in there, all right? I mean, this was severe, and this was the argument for hundreds of years, all right, centuries. This was the argument. All right, so that's our words. You're going to see those reappear. Everybody got it? Mono, meaning one singular. Mia, which means one nature, but two persons. All right, and then one united nature, but two persons. And then a geophysicist means two natures, human, God, combined in one person. Steve, you with me? All right. If I can get Steve on board with this, now Logan gave me the thumbs up. He understood it all. So if you needed any advice, Steve, just go over to Logan. Logan, explain that to me again, and Logan will get you straightened out. All right. All right. So Oriental Orthodox churches. The same author that Philip Jenkins wrote a book, and it was basically, he talked about the lost church of Christianity. And really until I opened up this book, because I had read some things about the Oriental Church and some things like that. In fact, at our men's study, one of our men's study members is Indian, from India, and he was talking about something, and he said about some church, and I'm looking at him puzzled, and it was a church in India, and I go, what are you talking about? And he mentioned it, and he finally goes, Nestorians. Oh, like that explains everything. And didn't mean much to me at the time, but that was what he said. But it was as a church, and they are an Oriental Orthodox church. Now, everybody remembers what Orthodox means, right? It's the right way of belief. Oriental, everybody know what Oriental means? From the East. Yeah. By the way, we're Occidental, in case you're curious. That's the other word. Oriental means you're from the East. Occidental means from your West. Somebody called me out on that one time because I said something about, oh, we're looking for an Oriental girl. And he goes, that sure is racist. And I go, it's not racist at all. That's just like saying you're from Texas or from Michigan or wherever. You know, it's like that's all you're saying. You know, you're a Yankee or you're a Southerner. That's all you're saying. You're Oriental or you're Occidental. We don't use those terms too much, but we do use Oriental, but we hardly ever see Occidental. All right, so it's the lost church, the Middle East, and it's surprising, some stuff in here. Hopefully you'll find this as interesting as what I found this. All right, so this all gets started basically in Antioch, and after I put this together, there is a mistake on here, and I'll kind of point it out. But if you consider Antioch being one of those 5 patriarchs, where were people first called Christians? Antioch. That's in the Bible, right? And so you get to Antioch up here, and it's kind of up the coast from Jerusalem. It's in the Levant. Remember, Jerusalem gets destroyed, right? And so the church spreads out. The next place was probably Antioch, along with Alexandria, which is back over here. I didn't put that on there. And this arrow should be coming from Alexandria down, and we'll kind of get to that. And so from Antioch, in particular to the east, there's a thing called the Silk Road. We don't hear a whole lot about it. It's more legendary for us. But all this stuff in the west, and Constantinople, by the way, is right about, yeah, there. All right. And so Constantinople, this is Greece. Italy would be over here, and we keep moving off the screen to France and Spain and so forth. So this is what the eastern part of the world looked like. All right. And so as you look at that, we're going to see the church up in Armenia and Georgia. That's the South Caucasus, if I can say that correctly. We're going to look at the Antioch church, and it spread down to this place, Seleucia. I didn't spell that right. It's C-T-E-S-C-I-F-O-N, Ctesiphon or something. I can't pronounce it. And from there, actually, they send missionaries out all over Asia, Mongolia, China, India. I didn't see anything that they ever got down into Southeast Asia, like where modern day Thailand and Cambodia and those countries are. But all these other places they did, it spread. And you'll see another map here in a second that'll kind of show you that. This is what it looked like in about 600 AD. All right, and that's just the name of the countries. If you listen to any history podcasts or anything like that, they'll talk about the Sassanid Empire, and that is Persia. That's modern day Iraq, Iran, and you'll hear that. These were the enemies, basically, of the Byzantine, which was later called the Byzantine Empire. These were the ones that were always fighting back and forth and paying each other not to invade and some of the things like that. This is also, you're familiar with Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar and some of the other biblical. That is where that is. This is a Persian, modern day Iran, modern day Iraq. And this in particular was in, this is near Baghdad. And so basically from there, the church is going to spread to the east. All right. We don't know much about Eastern Christianity history, and there's some reasons for that. One, the languages are not familiar to Western scholars. All right. And the sermons, the writing, the history, the records are just not translated. It was a Syrian version, or Syriac. Was a lot of what went on with that. Eastern Christianity was considered heretical by the West. All right. Why? Because they're an historian. All right. That's what's going to spread is, and you'll see a little bit of that. Their authority, they were not papal led. These were patriarchs. They actually had their own patriarchs. That you're going to see that as we move through that area. The scripture, it's not Latin. And by the way, I'm kind of moving ahead. When you talk about not papal, Western Christianity becomes Rome, especially after Islam. It pretty well becomes Rome, and you're going to see Constantinople hang on there too. But North Africa, the Levant, which the Levant, if you ever hear that term, that's Jerusalem all the way up to Antioch. That whole area, that's all going to be taken over by Islam. Again, the scripture's not in Latin, and basically the West, that was the only thing they had was Latin at that time. The liturgy is very different than what it is. In fact, they'll still have some common elements. Like they still have the Eucharist, the bread, they'll still do some things like that. Different songs in a different language. All right, so over the salvation, they have some different views on atonement. We'll kind of look at that at the end of the lesson. And it's never covered in history classes. Why? Islam destroyed most of the written material, and our focus is always, and it's more interesting too. The Western stuff, we can identify that. We know where Italy is, we know where Greece is, we know where France is. You can kind of go through that. You see how the church developed and spread during those places. So that's one of the things. And so this is a forgotten church. This is the ones that Western people never think about. All right, Oriental Orthodoxy. And here's some guys here. They like the big hats. Those are not papal hats. Those are patriarch hats. And you see them holding their canes and the long beards, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes along with that. Today, there's between 60 and 87 million Oriental Orthodox Christians. That blew me away. All right, and you'll see some of what goes on to this. There are 6 national churches: the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria, which is based out of Egypt; the Syriac Orthodox Church of Antioch, which is based out of Syria; and then there is a branch of it in India, is the Malankara, and I think that's what Matthew had said in our men's Bible study. He said they're Malankara Syrian, and I was like, that means nothing to me. And then Armenia Apostolic Church goes back up north. And then there's the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church and the Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo Church. And we'll talk about what that means in a little bit too. So you got that 6 national churches. These are the churches of the nation. And then there's the one I didn't put in there is the Georgia. Georgia has a Georgia Orthodox Church as well too. So we'll see that. All of these believe they have apostolic continuity, which means they were founded by an apostle, their church was, and their patriarch has basically been ordained by the previous patriarch, going all the way back to the apostles who were basically ordained by Christ. And so they have that continuity. So when we talk about these, they will talk about their having their apostolic authority. They are autocephalous, that's a new word, which means self-governing. New River is an autocephalous church. We don't answer to anybody else. But these they're talking about like Armenian, that's their Armenian church in total. Now they will have a patriarch, or I think they call it a Catholicos up there, and that's what they'll have. If you go down into the Coptic church, I think it's the Coptic or the Syriac, they have a pope. And they have a pope that's down there, and so they will have a head of the church, but they're not ruled by Rome, or if you're Coptic, you're not ruled by Ethiopian and so forth. And so that's basically what it is. Autocephalous means it's self-governing, has a patriarch, a pope, or a Catholico. New words, guys. You hadn't heard this before, have you? They have distinct traditions and liturgies. And then we're going to talk about Africa first. All right. So tonight, our meal, we had a traditional Ethiopian meal, and kind of interesting. I think the bread was not a hit. There seemed like there's a lot of it left over there. It was a sourdough bread, and I know Steve gave it the thumbs down, and I kind of left some on my plate too. So I'll just sit there. The stew was excellent, though. I'd eat that all day long. So we'll get on there. Here's a good picture of Africa. We're going to talk about that. By the way, Africa today, all right, I'll save it. Between 40 and 60 AD, think about this. How far after Christ is that? Less than 10 years to maybe 30. Yeah. Mark the Evangelist established the Coptic church. Now, this is their tradition, but there's good evidence that Mark, at the dispersion, went south and went to Alexandria. All right. In 2nd century, it spread to the Maghreb areas that we don't talk about, but that's North Africa, modern day Libya, and I don't know what else is there, Morocco, those areas, Carthage, those were, and if you look at Alexandria, those are pretty far north and west, and so that's where it spread to. It was very strong among Berbers, and you think about Berbers, and that's kind of the nomadic or, anyway, it's a race of people, basically. Augustine, St. Augustine, if you will, he was a Berber. His mother was a Berber for sure. His dad might have been Roman, but that was one of the ones that he did. Is that right? In the 4th century, King Ezana of Aksum, modern-day Ethiopia, adopts Christianity and makes it the state religion. It's not the first, but it still holds today. All right, I'll just do that. So from the 4th century, all right, years 300, that is the state religion. Kind of matches what's going on in the Roman Empire with Constantine, making Christianity acceptable, and then the next guy making it the state religion in late 4th century. All right. In the 7th century, Islam arrives. All right. And North Africa declines. So that Maghreb up there, today that's somewhere north of 95% Islam. So the church up there was very, very strong. Not anymore. All right. But Ethiopia and Nubia, which is modern day Sudan, those churches actually grew because they fought Islam and they fought them back. And so they are still Christian today. So there's some very interesting maps that you can get into when you do that. In the 15th century, Roman Catholicism, via the Portuguese, take the gospel to sub-Saharan Africa. So you see the equator here, and this is that Sahara Desert that's in the middle of it. So south of there now gets Christianized by the Portuguese Roman Catholic. And then in the 17th century, Dutch settlers, which are Reformed Church Christianity, we'll talk about them sometime in several weeks, they're going to go to South Africa. And some of the apartheid issues and some things like that come right out of what goes on with the Dutch settling South Africa. And then in the 19th and 20th centuries, including our efforts, Protestantism spreads through missionary efforts. Today, if I ask you this question, what is the largest religion in Africa? What would you respond? Christianity. 49%. There's more Christians down, and it's basically sub-Saharan, all right? But there are more Christians than there are in any place else. It's just surprising. I would have said Islam too, because you think of those northern places, that Egypt and those places up there, which are staunchly Islam. But if you get south of there, Ethiopia and such, you go south, it becomes Christian. And yet there's still fighting going on even today. I think we got involved a little bit in that. So, all right. So the Coptic Orthodox Church. Now this is a church over in Richardson. And Kathy and I had how would you describe it? It's a cultural experience. All right. And that is a Coptic church. And there were probably 250 people there by the time that church was over with. They have a really nice building, by the way. All right. And it's the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria. And we go in there and I'm thinking Orthodox and I'm thinking more of the Greek Orthodox. No. It's not. It's just different. They have the apostolic lineage back to St. Mark. And that's what they'll say is that their ordination comes from St. Mark all the way back. This is the birthplace of monasticism, because remember this is Alexandria, and that is St. Anthony. St. Anthony of the Desert, and that's where monasticism got started, so they lay claim to him. They have an emphasis on Miaphysite Christianity. What does that mean? Yeah, one nature. I'm sorry.
Two natures, one body.
Yeah, two natures in one body. And how that differs from Diaphysitism, I don't know. I get confused with it. So, but that's what they do. They have an emphasis on that. Since Kathy and I, when we walked in, we said we were Protestant. We're not this. All right. Protestantism, by and large, would say that we're Diaphysite. All right. So the tradition is foundational, and what I mean by that is tradition is what rules. They believe in the divine liturgy, or the holy liturgy is what they'll say. And you go there, and I would encourage you, if you ever want to just go have a cultural experience without leaving the United States, go up there and visit for about 3 hours on a Sunday. It was fascinating to me. And I left out, and Kathy and I are both looking at each other, and I said, "What do you feel like?" And I said, "I feel like I just went through a church history class." Because their liturgy, they bring up Athanasius, and they bring up the Nicene Creed, and they'll go through and list things over and over again, all throughout their liturgy. And the liturgy basically means what you say in worship service and how it goes through. Yeah. I'm watching the time. They have unique rituals for communion. The focus of their worship service was on communion. I would say Kathy and I were there for about 2.5 hours. We left at communion time because it was going to take a while, because they were going to serve communion to 250 people, and we weren't included, so we're just basically sitting there. And there's stuff going on during communion, but they prepare that. They consecrate the bread. They do holy baking and holy mixing of the materials. They consecrate it, and they do this, and they come in and they inspect it, and they put things over it, and they bring it up to the table. They bless it more, and they wave incense over it. I don't know if they did that, but it goes on, and it is an elaborate ceremony, basically, in terms of communion. And then they will finally take communion. Baptism also, and confession. There was, as we were there, one of their priests, I guess, would go around, and people would hand him little slips of paper, and then he would go like that. And Kathy's kind of sitting at the back, and he pops her one. All right. And so a little while later, a deacon comes up to me. They did that a couple of times. They said, "What do you need? Everything okay? You understand everything?" I said, "Oh, no, very good, very good." I said, "But what was that priest doing like this?" He said, "He's granting absolution." Now that's different, all right? And Kathy got absolution, and I didn't. And I'm really jealous about that, just so you'll know. Either that or she had something to confess and I didn't. So I don't know. You guys figure that out. So anyway, just different rituals, different things that are going on like that. The liturgy, fascinating, was in Coptic. It's a language. Arabic, makes sense since they're from Egypt. Greek, since they are formerly Grecian speaking. And English, because we are in America, basically. And if we said, "Lord have mercy," 100 times, we might not be enough. And it was crazy because it's like everything, and it's singing, Lord have mercy. And anyway, it just went on and on and on. Some of the other things about this is the women have to be covered. Kathy she had to put a jacket over her head or something like that because we didn't have it. And it was very colorful though. And so we walked in, it was just different. Men and women sat on opposite sides, even though there were some women sitting back where I was kind of in the, I don't know what you call it, the heathen area or something, because there was kids and women and all sorts of things were happening back where I was. Men were all up front, women were all over here, and that was kind of how things went. And they put on robes during this. It was very colorful, just anyway, a cultural experience. They are considered the suffering church because of the persecution that they have had throughout history. And they go all the way back into the pre-Constantine time, the Roman times, Diocletian and Nero and stuff, and they will bring that up in the liturgy when they talk about that. And they'll talk about somebody suffering under the persecution of Nero or one of the emperors. And so they kind of run through all that, and just fascinating. That's where you go through the church history class, and they'll do the Nicene Creed, and all that was in their liturgy. Again, if you ever want to go, say, hey, you want to go do that again? I might say, yeah. Got to kind of watch what goes on with us. But anyway, so the Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo Church is just north of that. And so if you look at that map, you can see where Ethiopia is down south of Addis Ababa, can't say that. And you go north of that, up on the coast, right across from Yemen, is Eritrea. That is a Christian country, right in the middle of all that Islam. And so that's what you get there. All right. It's headquartered there. It's granted autonomy from the Coptic Church in 1993. So it became autocephalous in 1993, pretty recent. They have about 3 million members worldwide. All right, pretty good number. Scattered a lot because Islam has chased a lot of them out as well too. They have over 1,500 congregations in the world. And I thought that was kind of interesting. They have a big emphasis on the Old Testament, and so they have Sabbath services and Sunday services. Okay, a little different. Their liturgy is in the Ge'ez language, so if you went to an Eritrean church here, and there are some around, you're not going to understand a thing. They have a strong teaching, as I said, on Old Testament, and they have political entanglement. Since this is a national church, their church patriarch, and I'm not sure what he was actually called, he was basically sacked by the president of the country. All right? And so now you have a patriarch in exile, and they installed a new patriarch. This is recent, by the way. And so back over in the United States, you have some people that are loyal to the old patriarch. And so they've kind of had a little schism in their church based on that and some disunity with that. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. So I wanted to say about Tewahedo means. It means being made one. That's literally that's how we translate it. And it's referring to their Christological stance of miaphysitism. God and human being made one in Jesus. That's where you get that at. So think about that. And so in their name, they're saying we are, and that's, I think, a Nestorian type view. I don't know. I get confused with it. Their first bishop was in the 4th century, again, going back to the 300s, Saint Frumentius. They were granted autocephalous autonomy from the Coptic Church in 1959, so still relatively, in some ways, new. They have strong Old Testament traditions, kosher foods, no pork. They have specific fasting days that they go through. We had some of their food tonight. And they are a dominant force in the Ethiopian country. And what I mean by that is if you grew up in Ethiopia, this was your brand of Christianity. All right? Nothing else. All right. Their worshipers remove their shoes when they go in. Women sit separately. And women aren't always allowed in church, depending on what time of the month it is. And they have some famous rock-hewn churches. And run across this is cool. I want to go here now. All right. Look at this. This is a granite whatever, and they cut these things out in here. And I just thought, and these are famous, these are World Heritage Site or whatever you know. And I was like, that is so cool. And you can see these are big. You see how the people down there at the bottom of this? And this was just 3 pictures. I think these are the same place, but then there were probably another 6 or 8 churches like this, and they have tunnels that lead into these things. And I thought that is just crazy. All right, what's their favorite? Let's go to Syriac Christianity. All right. Now Edessa, not Odessa, like Odessa, Texas. This is Edessa. It was a major center of theological study and translation, kind of Alexandria of the North, if you will, or Harvard of Syria, if you will. This was the place. It had a rich body of ecclesiastical documents. One of them is called the Acts of Thomas, which if you get in and read that, kind of gets real interesting about some things. They have the oldest Christian music, and go on to Amazon or whatever your music thing in it and type in the Odes of Solomon. And there's some modern renditions of the Odes of Solomon from this church. And I did that, not necessarily my kind of music, but it was interesting. Edessa's up here, Antioch's here. You see Lebanon, Damascus, Jerusalem's going to be a little further south. And you work your way around the coast and you get Ephesus and so forth. Major, major place. All right. The Syrian Orthodox Church is called Jacobite. And Nestorian, you know, if you use these terms, Jacobite or Nestorian, it's like calling the Church of the Latter-day Saints Mormons. It's not necessarily what they would call themselves, all right? But, and some people say that kind of becomes a little bit of an offensive term to them, but it's easier for other people. Like when I talked to Matthew, he said, they're Jacobite. And it's like, I don't know what that meant. They began basically because the exile of Severus of Antioch by the Emperor Justin I in an attempt to enforce the Council of Chalcedon, which we saw that early on, right? And so they're enforcing this. They're saying basically if you don't adhere to, if you're not harmonious with us, you're out of here. And so, Severus of Antioch was out of there, went to Edessa, and Jacob Baradaeus was the bishop of Edessa in the 6th century, and he ordained another guy who's a monophysite. Remember what monophysite is? One nature, God alone. And he sets him up as the Antioch bishop, and they set up a, if you will, a shadow church. It's not a legal church because it's not orthodox. All right. One of the things like this in there, the Melkites is a terminology that was kind of derogatory that meant, oh, you're the emperor's men. You know, so if you were Orthodox, basically you're only Orthodox because the emperor said so. And so unlike the Melkites, Jacob Baradaeus never compromised orthodoxy to win the favor of the emperors. And that was said by a Coptic historian. So that's who Jacob Baradaeus is. In the 7th century, the identity began to shift from religious more to ethnic. And so that starts becoming a thing. And so you get and they speak the Edessan Aramaic language still to this day. All right. There are about 600,000 members scattered throughout the world of this. And a lot of them are going to be in Asia, India, some places like that. All right. All right. South Caucasus. All right. This is basically these areas. Here's Russia. North Caucasus is Russia. If you go south of there, you see the Black Sea over here, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. All right. And so Caucasians, that's where we get that name from. So let's talk about that area a little bit. I'm not going to talk about Azerbaijan because that basically becomes Muslim. All right. But these other two, not Muslim today. And so the Armenian Apostolic Church, and remember that apostolic, they're going to trace things back to an apostle. So Akbar V, this is their history, had leprosy, and he sent a letter to Jesus saying, come up here and heal me. Yeah, I heard you're healing. Are we time-wise? 10 minutes, okay. To cure him. So Jesus, their history, replied to him and said, you really can't right now. I got my ministry going on down here, and I'm going to send some disciples up there. So in AD 70, Jerusalem gets sacked. Missionaries are out. Bartholomew and Thaddeus, if you ever wondered where these guys ended up, this is their history. They were missionaries, and they brought an image of Jesus that cured Akbar. And you see his picture over there, and so cured him of leprosy. And they basically just gave him this cloth. Now that gets real interesting about the cloth. supposedly that cloth got moved to Constantinople because they're going to hoard all the relics and everything else like that, and then they're going to use it for their purposes. And then when the Crusades happened, basically that cloth, and I think it's the Fourth Crusade, 1250, around there, basically it gets taken by the Roman Catholics and it gets shipped back to Paris, France, and it gets put in Sainte-Chapelle, which was the chapel for the emperors. It's a very beautiful place. And then when the French Revolution happened, they lost it. All right. Somebody may have that and they'll turn it up someday and we'll see what it was. But that, you get those really kind of interesting things that go on with that kind of stuff. Well, in 300 AD, this king made Christianity the state religion, still that way today. Gregory the Illuminator, he was made the Catholicos, all right, which is basically a patriarch or pope. It's the highest pope level that you can get, and you get some of those. He was the universal pope for Armenia. Some of their, they have some unique Oriental doctrines. They have an emphasis that, and a lot of their liturgy is going to emphasize their Christian history. So in their liturgy, and it would be like if New River said in, whatever it was, about 17 years ago, Ben Stevens and these people and da-da-da, and we're going to say that and ask for them blessing, and then Lord have mercy, and then you can move on to the next thing. And so that's part of the liturgy that gets put into this stuff, and it becomes conscious. It's just like you hear this stuff over and over and over again. All right, move north to Georgia. All right, it became the state religion in 337. Saint Nino, a lady, all right, she's called the Enlightener of Georgia, and she brought that to Georgia from Cappadocia in the 4th century. And basically they have Eastern Orthodox, not Oriental, Eastern Orthodox doctrines. They have an emphasis on Gregorian or Georgian, I guess Georgian saints. This is not where you get the Gregorian chants. That's about Gregory, but these are Georgian, and it's not Atlanta, Georgia either, by the way. One of them that I thought was interesting was the 9 Kerhulidze brothers and 9,000 martyrs of Maribaba. All right, and that happened in 1625. Basically, they were fighting with the Persians and the Islam and stuff. And so you see the 9 brothers over there and the mother and the sister, and they're all martyrs. They get venerated in their church and in their church liturgy. If you went to one of their churches, or when we go to one of their churches, hopefully this next year, that will be mentioned. We won't understand a word of it because it'll all be in Georgian. And so their musical style is polyphonic, and you can actually go look at some of this up and you'll hear it. And it's pretty interesting to listen to. Not really we're not going to do it in New River, let's put it that way. They have an emphasis on monasticism in this church because Cappadocia, they're bringing some of that Cappadocian flavor up there. They have some really unique architecture over the centuries that they're well known for. And it's more than just a religious body, is what you'll hear. It is the pillar of Georgian statehood. You cannot separate Georgian politics or anything out from the church. You know, we have a pretty strong separation of church and state here. That is not the way at all. In fact, that gets so much so that when the Russians took them over, like the Soviet Republic, that was a huge, huge problem for that because Russians wanted to make them Russian Orthodox, and they resisted because they were Georgian. And that still holds today. And as soon as they got free back in the Gorbachev era, when they got free, they went right back to that because it's so strong in their state identity. So they blend the faith with the national character. All right, this was the Church of the East in the Middle Ages. All right, so about the year, I think it's 600. These are all where they had patriarchs. And so you start over in Alexandria and you go all the way to China and all the way up into Mongolia. You get down into Southeast Asia, you go down into India, and you see that. And you can't read these, but these where they had patriarchs, which means there was a bishop there, there were churches there. There were more churches, or there were more Christians. They had estimated about 12 million Christians in the Middle Ages, and that was more than what's going on at the same time in Europe. because Europe was a mess. All right, you had Huns and all sorts of things going on in Europe, and the Franks, which were not Christian at the start. Northern Europe basically was not Christian, and it was more of a Southern Europe kind of thing. And by the time Islam comes in, Christianity in Europe was pretty well squeezed. All right, and you didn't really evangelize all of Europe until nearly the 12th century. All right, so just a little picture of that. Here's Persia. That was the Persian Empire. You see the Byzantine Empire. You can see how they would have issues there. Persia at that time was Zoroastrianism, whole different religion. We won't get into that. Christianity got into Persia by the 3rd century. During the reign of Sapor II, there was a 40-year persecution. And then they had in the 4th century into the 5th century a little bit, they enjoyed royal favor. Wasn't the state religion, but they translated the Bible into Persian. And the Sogdian is the Iranian Bible of today. There are Christians in Iran. All right, it's something we don't think about very often, but there are Christians in Iran, and they would be of this the Church of the East. They had another persecution, and they became this, and then after that, they became the center of Christianity in the 5th and 6th centuries. And there were more Christians there east of Constantinople than there were west of Constantinople at that time. It was the national religion of Persia, which got to be real interesting when you think about that. What's going to happen? Islam's going to come through and things change. The gospel spread along the Silk Road because they went down into India and China and other places like that. And you can find gravestones in Turkestan, India, China, and Mongolia that will have their crosses on there. It is Nestorian. We're going to kind of go through this. It was formerly organized in 280 under Mar Papa Bar Gagia in Seleucia. There's the spelled correct. Cesphon near Baghdad. Which is basically near Baghdad. It's about 30 or 40 miles from Baghdad. They declared independence from Antioch in 410, and by year 1000, there were 68 cities with churches and Eastern bishops. Had about 12 million members. It declined over the next 400 years. Today, there's about 400,000 members of the Church of the East, now, or Nestorian churches, and a lot of them are going to be down. There's some in Syria, believe it or not, but a lot of the others are going to be down in India and some other areas like that. All right. They have a Diophysite theology. Remember what that means? Okay. They venerate Nestorius, though. He's a saint for these guys, which I thought was curious because he's not necessarily Diophysite. Anyway, they don't use icons. Some of that is because they're influenced by Islam, and Islam has no pictures of saints or anything like that, and so they've been influenced by that. So they don't. They use Christotokos, not Theotokos. All right? Big difference. Mary was the mother of Christ. She was not the mother of God. All right? So you guys work that out on your own. They use the Eastern Syrian Rite, and then we've kind of covered some of that. I thought this was cool. These are Nestorian crosses. This is on a display someplace, and they put it in something I found, of the Yuan, a Chinese dynasty. And so they've got this collection of crosses in China, which I think was really cool. Not there today. There are lots of other reasons. They actually went into Japan, some of this as well too. Now, at the time, Christian missionaries are going along the Silk Road and evangelizing. You have Buddhist missionaries that are coming up from the southeast, and they exchange ideas. It's civil. They're not at war with each other, and they believe different things. One of the things that struck me in Cambodia, and I look at this, as you see the Buddhist monks, and they got their orange robes, and they're all over the place, and they're young men. They make it a point to teach their youth solid scripture. Not scripture, solid Buddhism, whatever it is. And they're not priests for life, they're priests for a number of years, and then they move out of that. But that's one of the things that I think, man, are we missing something on this? And that's what sometimes I think of, like how strong Buddhism is And you go to those places and you don't find Christianity, and it's going like, I don't know that we want it bad enough sometimes. So this right here is a cross. And does anybody recognize what that is at the bottom of the cross? That is a lotus flower. And this is the merging of Christianity and Buddhism, because the lotus flower is what the Buddhists would believe as it flowers, that is enlightenment. And that's their symbol for enlightenment. And so this cross was produced basically to show enlightenment is in Christ. And I thought that was interesting as I got through this, because I first showed this to Kathy and she thought it was disturbing because too much Buddhism in here and not enough Christianity, but that's what it meant to us. But it's kind of that merging between Christianity and Buddhism, and Christians would have said, well, the enlightenment that you're talking about is in Christ, or in the cross. All right, summary of their doctrine. We're going to kind of race through this because we are out of time. Polity, liturgy, scripture. I want to get down to the sacraments, or they call them the holy mysteries a lot of times. High focus on Eucharist and some others. The veneration of Mary and saints, and they're not real big on icons, even though they may venerate them. Now, salvation and atonement. Brian England said something to me a few weeks ago. He had been a couple of months ago by now, he had gone to Istanbul, and he came and he said, you know, I really think their views on atonement are really interesting compared to our views on atonement. And I'm sitting there going, what in the world is Brian talking about? He acts like I ought to know what this means. So you have to look up atonement, and basically in our Western mind, atonement is a legal thing, a substitutionary atonement. Christ died on the cross. Our sin has to be paid, and it's paid through Christ. Everybody understands that. You've heard that. They don't view it that way. They view that Eastern, as they say, healing and restoration is the atonement, and sin is a wound, not a debt, and that wound needs to be healed. And that is different than what we think. And I have to wrestle with that and go like, there is some truth in there, but I've got Western legal theology running through my blood, all right? But I look at that and I go like, that is a different way. By the way, the Orthodox Church, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, they're going to have that same view of atonement. And so they get a whole different view on grace because they don't have Augustine and 1,500 years of Western theology running through their blood. So, all right. Coming next, Muhammad, Islam, and then a couple of weeks we're going to do the last one, the philosopher. Real quick, like, are there any questions here, or did you get any online, Jess? Steve?
Yeah, I had one. I had an encounter with an Ethiopian a week or 2 weeks ago. And the lady said, and she was a Christian, and she said to me as we were talking, she was cutting my hair, something about that the Ethiopians have 4 additional books
Yeah.
in their Bible, and it's plausible that the parting of the Red Sea took place and kind of opened up down at one end in Ethiopia. So just curious, your thoughts, reactions.
Well, I hadn't heard about the Red Sea, so we didn't talk about the canons that they use. These different ones will have different canons than what we have. One of them has 81 different books in the Bible, their canon of the Bible. A lot of those will have similar to ours, but they will not have 2nd, 3rd John, Jude, and Revelation. So they just kind of cut that last piece out, and they might have 21 books or something like that. And so they will have a different canon. But you have to remember, if you're talking to somebody from us, go back to authority. Protestants, which we're in the Protestant camp, we believe Scripture is authority. But they will look at that and they go like, well, what Scripture? And we believe Scripture authority, and where does that Scripture come from? And they'll say, well, that Scripture came from the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. All right, and so that's not necessarily valid. We have a different group that did not come from the Roman Catholic Church, and we have, like I think it's the Letter of Thomas. That's one of the ones that you'll see in there, and you can get into that. I did not get into a whole lot of that. I just know that I referenced it, and it is different. So a lot of times, if you were trying to have a discussion about that, you're talking on 2 different levels. And the other is tradition and ritual are their supreme authority. All right. if it doesn't meet with what that tradition says, what the fathers have taught us for centuries, then you're wrong. And you're not orthodox. And so, by the way, we don't want to have communion with you. If you want to come around to that, then that's it. So that's the way they kind of, I don't want to say look down on us, but they look at us and say, I don't think that they're our judge, but that's what they would basically judge on that. So good question though. I don't know if people online heard it, but they have a different, these churches have a different canon. And by the way, completely different language. Translated out, they believe that it was translated out of Syria, all right, Syriac language, and that is their authorized version, all right. Now, if you get in the translation, you're trying to translate from Syrian back into English and Greek into English, let's say, they don't always sync up real smooth. And you got centuries of stuff that have kind of changed over those things. So, and the English language is kind of messed up compared to everything anyway. So, all right. Anything else? Well, thank you for your attention tonight, and we'll see you next week.